Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
This is our league, and this is your league. From the 55-yard line on CFL America Radio and the Sports History Network.
This is a league of A's and BCs. It's green and red and gold and black and blue. This is a league with 2 official languages and many unofficial languages. It's East versus West, wheat versus iron, love versus hate. This is a league where superstars are extraordinary and ordinary at the same time. It's a league of ice, of fog, of mud and wind. And for one Sunday in November, it's the nation's glue. This is a league as diverse as a country, a league of Jacksons and Kwongs, Johnsons, Moscas, O'Shea's, and Haji Razulis. This is his league, her league, their league, and their league. It's my league, and it's your league. This is our league.
And welcome to From the 55-Yard Line with Greg here, and I'm with Scott. And we just wrapped up a very great interview with Rich Podolsky, who wrote the great book about the NFL Today, the original NFL Today, called You Are Looking Live. So, but before we go into that interview, and that was a great interview. Scott, don't you think that was one where you and I it brought back a lot of good memories?
Oh yeah, and it was based. Hey, how are you? I'm good. Boom. Here's history.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it was fantastic.
Yes.
He just knows so much, and the way he told the stories, I think people are really going to like it.
Well, and I'm happy too. I got to ask about Jane Kennedy because I had a crush on her when I was 12. So that was like before we wrapped up. I got to ask about Jane Kennedy. We talk about Jimmy the Greek. We talk about, and for CFL people that are listening here, we talk some CFL history, and we talk about Winnipeg Blue Bomber history, and we talk about the great. Bear with me here. I apologize. And we talk about Indian Jack Jacobs with former Oklahoma Sooner, former Green Bay Packer, and most importantly, former Winnipeg Blue Bomber, like I said. And so he told us a great story just about his career. And then we moved in and talked about his career at the NFL Today, all the people he knew. We talked about Jimmy the Greek. So if you like history, I think if you like, and we cover both CFL history and NFL history on this one, which made it even better. It was a double bonus. So Scott, how you been, buddy?
Good. How are you? Do you have a nice Thanksgiving holiday?
Not bad. Yeah, got to see pretty much all the games. Of course, the Bears game was the only one worth. I think, I missed the second game because we were eating, but obviously the Bears game, had on down here. Unfortunately, I had the Detroit defense in fantasy football, so it didn't go so well for me.
Poor Detroit. Poor Detroit. But then again, I'm a Jets fan, so you can feel sorry for me too. Although they did win, yay!
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's we're at that point in the NFL season where pretty much every team is in. Even what was it the other day? So they were talking on the radio. It's like, yeah, the Bears have a chance, and I'm like, for what? Just if you look at the way the playoffs are shaking out, there's still that outside 1 in a million chance that the Bears could actually get in. It won't happen after this week against against my Cardinals. Won't happen, but should be an interesting game. I know our buddy Joe Zimba is really going to be watching that game because he's got 2 of his hometown teams in it.
I just want to do a time jump and go and get to the playoffs now. I mean, because of course, my issue as a Jets fan was settled, week 1, but.
Right, as were your Ticats last week. Well, no, your Ticats won, so we got them going against the Argos. Yeah, so. I shouldn't say that. I apologize, but yeah, we still got. It's going to be a good game between the Argos, and I heard the stadium's going to be sold out.
I hope so. I mean, it's a great rivalry anyway. I was very happy. I did get to see it because it was on ESPN too. So that was one game I did get to watch. Of course, the great game afterwards, which was one of the best games of the year, I didn't get to see because it's ESPN News and I don't get that.
But wait a minute. Yeah, you're right.
No, I won't be able to see either of the finals this week, the Eastern or the Western final. Right. I won't be able to watch either. So
I think originally it was supposed to be on ESPN Plus, and I was doing a video cast, and we were talking, and I couldn't find it, but eventually I did find it. It was, like I said, it was on ESPN News, so I got to watch the end of the game. Great game. Yeah, great game. What do you think of CFL season so far? I mean, I know it's only 14 games, and it just seems like there's a lot of. I've heard too many complaints about bad football, but honestly, I haven't seen bad football, at least from my perspective.
Well, for me, it's just, and again, I haven't hit all the games that I would normally hit, but a lot of them just weren't as entertaining as I had hoped. They weren't as high scoring. Not necessarily
right. Well,
bad football. But just not the kind of football that keeps me engaged like the CFL normally does. So,
well, they seem to, in a way, I guess, kind of regress back to a lot more. The scores were obviously lower. I mean, the NFL, we all know, has turned into a CFL type league with this type of style. So hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully next season we'll see a definite improvement in play. But with that said, I mean, who knows? I mean, the way things have been going lately, new variants, we don't know what's going on. I know just recently there was a few things, and I know I was engaged in a little bit of a Twitter war the other day, which I know you stayed out of. But with the talk of the rumor mill about the Argos going to the XFL, thoughts?
Well, the thing I had heard, frankly, I wasn't even following that rumor. I had heard someone mention, and this might have just some rando, that the NFL is thinking about expanding to 36, so they were talking about Toronto as being one of the 4,
right?
And that intrigued me because I thought, I mean, that's always seemed like a next step possibility. I mean, if the NFL ever goes to 36 teams, I think Toronto obviously would be a choice,
right?
But
and then also to factor in, and I apologize, I didn't mean to. Well, go ahead, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, I didn't really have a thought. I mean, as far as the XFL stuff, I mean, all that's just whatever. I mean,
Well, part of me even thinks too. I mean, we don't really have the Buffalo Bills stadium situation's not finally cleared, and if a team were to move for stadium purposes, I mean, I could easily see the Bills just moving across the lake and. The Bills just playing Canada's team. I mean, that to me, I think would make the most sense. I mean, you could keep at least, or even just move across to Niagara and keep that, or even Hamilton and just keep that big metro area. But with that said, to me, that's the only, I can't see the XFL going to Canada, getting the Argos and being a success. I mean, let's face it. And as much as we want, spring football to succeed, history has obviously shown us that, after that mid-season, I mean, interest kind of tapers off. So, I mean, my opinion is I just think it's just a lot of crap that's being posted out there with rumors. Nothing's based on fact. And as you know, as a sports writer, facts ultimately do matter. And I know in my professions, facts matter too. And nobody's given me anything but hype. When I've read stuff, nobody has given giving anything but guesses, maybes, wishful thinking. So that's where I think we're at. So I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only can be when it comes to the XFL or USFL or whatever. I mean, the XFL, yeah, we now know names of teams, but it's been a month since they were supposed to announce Birmingham as the hub. They still haven't done that. So I don't know if that deal fell through or if they're just waiting for some, grand announcement. And as far as the XFL, I know they're hiring front office people, but I still don't really know, how much the new XFL will be like the old XFL. I mean, it's almost to the point, and this is just me speaking as a sports fan right now.
Right.
I'm segueing into basketball. And I've already been into hockey. So I'm kind of, as far as spring football, that's great. But I'll wait till it gets here before I really start to worry about it one way or the other.
And the only thing too, we got maybe. So when I woke up this morning and I woke up to your tweet about, the lockout. Well, I guess if the USFL is going to start, good things start if we even have baseball. I mean, when we talked with Ron Snyder about the Baltimore Stallions and just kind of how that was a confluence of events between the strike, the Colts leaving. But I don't think this is going to be history repeating itself. But I think there's an opportunity possibly for the USFL to gain some eyeballs and to gain some interest if there is zero baseball at all. But
yeah, and I sometimes wonder what the overlap is. I mean, because you look at a baseball season that's 162 games. I mean, it seems like someone could be interested in both. I mean, sure. I'm sure it would help if that major league sport is not playing. That opens the door for eyes being on your sport. But even if it is, I'm just not sure if it makes all that much difference. But
true. Yeah. And we live in a day and age now, let's face it. You can sit there on the couch, have one game on, another game on your phone. So I think, it's going to be some time before we kind of figure everything out. So, so with that said, I will end here with Scott and I chatting about CFL and what's your pick for this weekend before I let you go in terms of just who's going to win this weekend between the Argos and the Ticats and the Bombers and the Riders?
Well, I'm always wrong, but what I hope, obviously.
I've seen you in our pick league.
I'm terrible. Yeah. I almost have a negative number on picks. I've missed more picks than I've made. But no, I would hope as a Ticats fan that they win, but I kind of think the Argos will win. I think Winnipeg will win on their half. But, we all win when the CFL wins. So it really
we do.
Matter. I'll be watching the Grey Cup regardless of who's in it, and I'll enjoy it.
Yeah. I'm like you. It's going to be it's going to be nice on Sunday because you got the Grey Cup playoffs, you got the Bears Cardinals, and the weather's going to be crap here in Chicago. So it's perfect. So I need to get all my, Big Ten championship is on Saturday. So I need to get out Saturday and hopefully Saturday, get all my errands run so I can sit at home comfortably up in my man cave up with all my football stuff and just watch a whole crap ton of football. And before I let anybody go, Scott and I just wrapped up Paul Wood's great book called The Year of the Rocket. So anybody out there is listening who has not read it, please go out and go buy it. It's great. As anybody who's following me on Twitter after the last few days has seen a lot of John Candy memes inspired by Paul's great book.
It is a great book. I just finished it a while back. Yeah, it's one of those things you pick it up and the next thing you know, you're done with it. And it's just excellent book. Great story.
It's funny. And before we head into the interview with Rich, but the great thing about that book was there was so much there we talked to Paul earlier, but he goes into depth. I mean, you can credit John Candy for saving the CFL before he died by kind of pushing that expansion, which got more money in, which basically bought them time to kind of right the ship. So, unfortunately here we are in 2021 with uncertainty, but I'm just hoping we can get magic, hopefully we can have somebody who's very visionary come into the CFL and figure out a way to kind of right the ship. And I think there are great ideas out there, but my opinion is, and I know, we've talked about this, but there's a lot of great ideas out there that haven't been tried, at least from what I can see. So hopefully this coming off season, we're going to see a renewed effort by the CFL to reach out to younger fans and, a big marketing push to bring people not only back into the stadiums, but in front of the TV and be talking CFL football like, you and I and a lot of our friends on Twitter, and it's a growing group of friends, do. But it'd sure be nice to see more people. And I think there's a lot more fans out there who would love the CFL if they would just only give it a chance. So, but hey, with that said, Greg and Scott signing off from here. On to our interview with Rich Podolsky, and enjoy it. And we're going to be talking hopefully here soon.
Hi, I'm Oz Davis of the True the Goats podcast here at the Sports History Network. I'd like to take a minute to tell you about quite possibly the greatest website of all time, newspapers.com. If you're listening to this podcast, or any of them at the Sports History Network, you're probably into sports history. And you probably also know that for learning about anything prior to, say, 1990 online, the typical search engines like are nearly completely useless. But then there's newspapers.com. Newspapers.com gives you access to over 640 million pages worth of news from North America, Britain, Ireland, and more, dating from 1798 to last week. Do up a search for Super Bowl I, the 36th Berlin Olympics, Wayne Gretzky's first game, whatever. Newspapers.com takes you there with historical flavor that search engines like just don't give you. And now, get a free 1-week subscription to newspapers.com by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/newspapers. With a paid subscription, you'll also be helping to support the production of this podcast and other Sports History Network shows. That's sportshistorynetwork.com/newspapers. Newspapers.com. Way better for searches than you know what I'm talking about.
You are looking live at the beautiful skyline of Tampa, Florida, where all eyes are focused on this stadium. It's the Buccaneers and the Philadelphia Eagles in an NFL playoff game.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tampa. The weather is beautiful, but isn't it always? We're going to treat Brent, Irv, Jane, Jack, and the Greek to some good old Southern hospitality, but only if they're cheering for the Buccaneers.
NFL Today is sponsored by Ryder, the best truck money can rent or lease. Wang, makers of computer and word processing systems. Wang, making the world more productive. And by Trinitron with a one-gun, one-lens system. And it's from Sony, the one and only. From the CBS Sports Control in Tampa, Florida, here's Brent Musburger.
Welcome to a sea of orange, and who would have believed it? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are in the playoffs against the Philadelphia Eagles. So we're down to 8 teams, and Jane and Irv and Jimmy, would you believe only 4 states still represented in the playoffs? Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, and California. Each of those 4 states with 2 teams. And Jimmy, later today out in San Diego, it's Houston against the Chargers. What about the Oilers' injury situation at this moment?
Brent, they tell me that the Bull Pastorini will not play. Camel will be undecided until absolutely at game time, when he will practice to see if he can make it. Burrows is playing at 90%, and Carpenter is out too. In other words, Houston's in rough shape.
So Gifford Nielsen will be starting at quarterback for Houston. Jane, do you remember the playoffs a year ago?
Oh, boy, do I. My very first playoffs was CBS, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Dallas, Minnesota, LA. I can't forget any of that.
Everyone thought the games would be close. But as it turned out, only one winner didn't score more than 30 points. Let's go back and show you. It was at Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, and it was going to be the tough Steelers against the defensive-minded Denver Broncos. And what a day for number 32. Franco Harris of the Steelers rushed for a pair of first-half touchdowns, and Pittsburgh built a slim 19-10 lead after the first 30 minutes of play. This was to set the tone throughout the playoffs. Number 32 on the ground and number 88 and 82 in the air. This tight game was busted wide open when that number 88, a ballet wide receiver by the name of Lynn Swann, caught one of two Terry Bradshaw touchdown passes in the final quarter. And here he comes, going to the air and making it look routine. 105 yards rushing by Franco, touchdown catches by Lynn and number 82 John Stallworth, all added up to a lopsided 33-10 victory as Pittsburgh advanced to its fourth AFC Championship game in 5 years. Then the next day, it was the rookie sensation who will not play today, Earl Campbell. He rushed for 118 yards as Houston destroyed the New England Patriots in Foxborough. It was to be Chuck Fairbanks' last day as coach of the Patriots. And Dan Pastorini, who will be missing later this afternoon, threw 3 touchdown passes against New England, 2 of which went to his underrated tight end, Mike Barber, number 86. And the Oilers rolled to a 31-14 triumph.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorium Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.
Hey, Rich, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you.
My pleasure, guys. What do you want to talk about first?
Well, we got a lot of stuff to cover. Not only your great book, but also that great article you sent us earlier in your research on Indian Jack, CFL star from back in the day that I'm sure a lot of CFL fans either know about or have heard about, but really don't know about. So, so it's great to have you. So
let's talk about Indian Jack first. As a matter
Sure. Floor is open.
Let me tell you a quick story. My wife was a Broadway agent, and she and another woman had an agency in New York, and she had an agent working for her by the name of Linda Jacobs. And Linda Jacobs was a very lovely young woman. We became friends, the three of us. Linda was a terrific agent, had some great Broadway actors and actresses and singers. And she was a very talented person. And one day we were sitting around and she showed me a football card and it said Indian Jack Jacobs. And it was, a guy, it looked like it was in the 40s or 50s, and a guy with a helmet without a face guard. It was a really old. And I said, who is that? And she said, that was my father. And I said, what? Your father was a pro football player? She said, yes, in the Canadian Football League. And that's how I started to get interested in it. And she said he was really great. He played for Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I said, geez, I'd never heard of him, Linda. She said, as a matter of fact, he played for the Packers too. So that, as a former sports writer and that I had covered the Dolphins, I kept wondering about this guy for years. And finally, I got around to doing something about it, started researching him. And the more research I found on how great this guy was, the more I realized he was a terrific story. And in fact, he had one of the greatest days of a Green Bay Packer quarterback ever had. And that was in the opening game of the 1947 season. Now, the history of that game was that the Packers were playing the Chicago Bears, who were the NFL world champions coming into that season. And they had one of the great all-time quarterbacks. And the Packers were the dregs of the league at that time. And they had a new coach, Curly Lambeau. And Lambeau brought in Indian Jack, who they acquired from Washington, where he sat on the bench behind another one of the all-time greats. I think it was Sammy Baugh in Washington. And he had finally got his chance to play in the opening game. He threw two touchdown passes. He ran for the winning touchdown, and he played 60 minutes. He played defensive back, and he intercepted 3 passes. That was an unbelievable game. They upset the Bears 29-20. But his success didn't last long in Green Bay because he liked to call his own plays, and that didn't go too well with Mr. Lambeau. And before you know it, he was on the bench, and he decided, instead of re-upping with the Packers, to take an offer from Winnipeg in Canada. And in a short time, he totally revamped that team. They began winning at a rate they had never done before, to the point where they had to build a new stadium, and there was such a demand for tickets, and the press called it the house that Jack built. And he was always known as Indian Jack. His prior credits, you might say, was he grew up on the Indian reservation in Oklahoma, didn't speak any English till he was 9 years old, and when his father finally sent him to school. And he became known as the greatest athlete ever to walk onto the campus at the University of Oklahoma. I think it was 1938 or 39 when he began there. And he still holds records 80-some years later that he held as the quarterback at Oklahoma. And he was the sensational punter. And I referenced one particular game, the first time Oklahoma ever upset a top 10 team. It was Santa Clara came in to Oklahoma to play. Santa Clara was undefeated in the top 10 at the time. I think it was around 1940. And he punted in that game 16 times. And the winning punt was when he punted a 74-yard punt and kept Santa Clara inside their own 10-yard line, and they went on to win the game in a very low-scoring game. Sorry I went on so long, guys.
No, that's great. I was going to ask you so many questions about the story you'd written about him, and you answered most of them. That was a terrific story, by the way. I was totally unaware of some of the accomplishments that he had.
Yeah, I'm fairly close with Jim Nance at CBS Sports, who wrote the foreword for my book, You Are Looking Live, which is about the NFL today. And a couple weeks ago, Jim did the Packers game, and I realized that he might not know about Indian Jack Jacobs. And I sent him, after he did the Packers game, I sent him the story on email, and he wrote me back that he thought it was just a great, tremendous story. He said he wished he had it. The next time he does the Packers game, he's going to talk about Indian Jack Jacobs having one of the greatest days that Packer quarterback ever had. And he thanked me profusely. He's a real student of history, loves telling the old stories and keeping the past alive. Jim Nantz is not only a great broadcaster, he's a great person.
Well, that's what I love about him and his broadcast, because he does bring that sense of history and reminds the viewers in terms of and especially in this day and age, it's very, very important, I think, with history. And in reading your article and obviously reading your book, there's so much history that just pours out of it. And I know, yourself and even Jim are kind of living history, because you were friends, you worked with everybody, for a long time with some of the greats. And can you tell us a story in terms of how you got involved with the NFL today? I know it was 1977, from 77 to 80 that you were that you wrote for the show. How did that all come about, and what were some of those experiences like?
I was a sports writer. I was covering the Miami Dolphins beginning in 1973 for the Palm Beach Post. And in 1974, the Dolphins hired a new public relations man by the name of Beano Cook, who was really mostly known as a college football guru, and went on to work. Previous to that job, he had worked 10 years at ABC Sports as Roone Arledge's college football guru. And then he wound up down at the Dolphins. He was looking for something different to do. And Don Shula was not happy that Beano was hired, because Don Shula was not consulted by Joe Robbie, the owner of the Dolphins. And the previous PR guy had left to become the sports editor of the Philadelphia Daily News. His name was Mike Rathett, and he was Shula's sidekick, you might say. He really worked for Shula and not for Joe Robbie, and Shula liked it that way, having the PR guy in his back pocket. And when Beano showed up at practice, Shula was not very happy about the situation, told him not to come to practice, but he did. And he delighted all the beat writers with his stories about working for Roone Arledge and ABC Sports and college football on TV. And I had always dreamed about working on television sports. I just sat at his knee, so to speak, listening to his stories. And Beano could really tell some great stories. And he was a master of the one-liner as well. So Beano and I got to be great friends. And when he wound up going back to back to New York to work for an old ABC guy who took over at CBS Sports by the name of Barry Frank, Beano said, "I'm going to get you in here as a writer or a publicity guy for the shows." And he was true to his word. He brought me in. A guy by the name of Michael Pearl, who I knew from Miami, was the producer of the NFL Today. Starting in 1975, I knew him from Miami. He worked as the number one sports producer for WTVJ down there. Very talented guy, smart guy. And when they needed a new writer to write some of the script for CBS Sports Spectacular and for the NFL Today, he was all too glad to give me a shot at it. And it worked out fairly nicely. But the big change in the NFL today, and the reason I wrote the book, was because I was so close with Phyllis George and Irv and Jimmy the Greek, and And I even enjoyed working for Brent, even though Brent didn't hang out with the rest of us like those other people did. So when Phyllis passed away, it saddened so many of us, and I started getting back in touch with my old CBS colleagues, and it hit me how much the show meant to me and how much it really meant to the country. And as I dug in to a little research, I realized that in 1975, there was an enormous change, not only in the way the NFL today was being broadcast, but in sports broadcasting altogether. Before 1975, none of the pregame shows were live. They were all taped days in advance. They were all done with middle-aged white men. And, you know, having an African-American like Irv Cross on a show like that was unheard of. Having a woman like Phyllis George on a show like that was unheard of. It just wasn't done. But in 75, a guy named Bob Wessler took over CBS Sports. He decided to go live with the show, to bring in Phyllis George. He cast her. He cast Irv Cross to do strategy. And, of course, he brought in Brent Musburger from Chicago, where Wessler had been running WBBM in Chicago. And he was a big star at CBS among the executives. And when he got a chance to run sports, he was like a kid in the candy store. So it was very interesting how the show had tremendously changed from middle-aged people to young people. Phyllis was 25. Irv and Brent were 35 when they started. The show went from having a whole bunch of tape stuff to live, exciting news. Brent opened every show by saying, "You are looking live," as they showed the stadiums. And let me tell you how that phrase came about. Early in the first season that they were all together in 75, they were holding a production meeting. Bob Fishman, the director, said, "You know, I got a couple of buddies who like to bet on the games, and they always want to know what the weather is." And we were thinking, you know, how can we let them know easily? And then Brent came up with this. He said, well, when we do this they called it a whip around, and they went from live shot of one stadium to another. He said, well, when I'm saying you are looking live at Soldier Field, or when you are looking live at Vet Stadium, when we're showing those stadiums, I could say you are looking live. That's what Brent said. And they'll know that that is the current weather at those stadiums. And it was really a tip off to the gamblers, that phrase, what the weather was. And it became a show the following year when they added Jimmy the Greek with a lot of gambling references. And the first year, the ratings were tremendous. They more than doubled the previous year. And the second year, they doubled again when Jimmy the Greek was added, with the excitement of talking about point spreads without actually mentioning the point spread. He would get around it by saying, oh, they'll win by a field goal, or I think they'll win 21-17. And if the line was 6, you know, he was saying, take the underdog.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, it's funny. No, it's funny. You should mention that, because until I read your book, and I'm going to be 55 here. I mean, I saw the show, started. But until I read your book, it did dawn on me that's what he was conveying by giving the scores.
Right. Well, you were pretty young then. You weren't into pull sheets or gambling or a friendly little side bet. But the Greek, when he came on the show, he was probably the most famous of the four of them. And by the way, the cover of the book has that iconic black and white photo of the four of them: Brent, Phyllis, the Greek, and Irv there. And Phyllis is not trying to look like a hottie on Fox Sports. She is dressed for work with a sport jacket of sorts, or a suit jacket. She was a hardworking bee on this show. But getting back to the Greek was really the best known of the group. Brent was a total unknown, unless you lived in Chicago. And Irv was only basically known in Philadelphia. where he did some NFL games that went back to the Eagles, where he was a star player. So, and Phyllis was Miss America, but sports fans didn't necessarily know her at all. The Greek, though, was very famous. First in 1948 for winning $1 million betting on Harry Truman to win the presidential election. A week before the election, Truman was a 20-1 underdog, and the Greek was shaving, and his sister said, "Don't grow a mustache," and he said, "Why?" And she said, "It reminds women of Hitler." Now this is 1948, and it wasn't only a couple of years after the Second World War, and he said it reminds women of Hitler. And the next thing he did is he looked at the front page of the Chicago Tribune, and there was a big picture of Thomas Dewey, who was the governor of New York, and he was the big favorite to win the presidential election. And all the Greeks saw was Dewey's big black mustache. And he said, "Oh my God, Truman's got a shot." And so he sent out 3 ladies to do some research. He sent them to the local A&P in Steubenville, Ohio, where he lived. And he told them to interview 500 women and asked them one question: "How do you feel about men with mustaches?" And 400 of the women said they didn't like men with mustaches. They preferred them without. That was enough for the Greek. He went to New York, to Lindy's, which was famous for its cheesecake. That was where all the bookies hung out, and Damon Runyon was hanging out there too at the same time. And he bet with 3 different guys, a total of 50,000 between one gave him odds of 17-1, 120-1, and 122-1. And I asked him, "Why did you take the 17-1 if you were getting 20 and 22? He said, "I was guaranteed the guy would pay off who was giving me 17-1. I wasn't sure about the others," he said, "but they all paid." And $1 million in those days is probably worth a 300 or 400 million today. It was an enormous amount. The Greek was not only rich, but 2 nights later he became nationally famous when Walter Winchell, who was the most powerful media person in the country, started his radio show, knocking on his teletype, saying, "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea. Let me tell you that Harry Truman wasn't the only big winner on election night. So was a young Greek boy from Steubenville, Ohio, Jimmy the Greek Snyder, who came down with over $1 million." Something like that. He said on the air. It went out there. The Greek became very, very famous, and he couldn't go anywhere in the country without being recognized. So
that was so ahead of his time. I mean, you just think where we're at now, what we have now, what we see on TV. If the Greek were only alive today to see what professional sports is,
he'd laugh.
Yeah.
He'd laugh, I tell a story in the beginning of the book, and the author's note about when I was working on a show called CBS Sports Spectacular. My job was to write the lead-ins and the bridges to the taped events that they showed, and they'll always check the AP news machine for updates on news. Well, I realized early on that AP did not update college football scores very often. And thanks to Bino Cook's help, I got the phone numbers at about 40 press boxes in the country. Well, one Saturday in October, we had Pete Rose on live to comment about the baseball playoffs. His team wasn't in it that year. And he's just standing around while the taped events were going on, and he sees me calling these press boxes, getting scores. And he starts to listen in, and then he comes over to me and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm getting updates on these games." He pulls out his pull sheet and says, "Can you get me the Ohio State score?" And I said, "Oh, okay." I had heard he liked to bet a little bit. So I called Ohio State and I said, this is CBS Sports calling. Can you give me an update on your game? Yeah, Ohio State's winning 20-13 or whatever. And I gave it to Rose. Well, Rose asked me to do that 2 more times before the show ended at 6 o'clock. And when the show ended, I walked out along with the producer and the director, but Pete Rose was sitting at my desk dialing that same number, asking for an update on the game. Without identifying himself, he was saying, this is CBS Sports. That's how sick he was at that time. So gambling's really changed a lot on television, to be sure. But in those days, it was taboo. Pete Rozelle didn't want Jimmy the Greek on. He didn't want any talk about point spreads, but Bob Wesley didn't care. He said, we're not doing anything that's illegal. And, we're not actually giving out the point spread. So, we're just entertaining the public. In fact, Pete Rozelle had gone before Congress and stated that he thought only 2% of the viewers of NFL games actually bet on the games. And when Beano Cook heard that, Beano said, well, if that's true, they all live on my block. So
that's great.
It was an interesting time. The Greek appearances. He also came on with a segment called The Greek's Grapevine, which was supposedly insider information that he was getting. A lot of it was from his friend Al Davis, the owner of the Oakland Raiders, and a lot of that was unconfirmed rumors. So Brent and the producers were getting a little tired of the Al Davis stuff, and they tried to get the Greek to get other verification of his insider news before he went out on the air with it. But one particular Sunday in October of 1980, the Greek had a legitimate piece of news, and that was that Notre Dame was going to fire their football coach, Dan Devine, and replace him with, of all things, a high school coach from Akron, Ohio named Jerry Faust. Nobody else had this. This was huge news.
I remember that episode.
That was huge news. Nobody else had it. They rehearsed it before they went on live. When they went on live, instead of throwing it to the Greek, Brent, and saying, Greek, what do you got for us? Brent blurted out the Greek's news and left the Greek flat-footed. He stole his thunder. Mike Pearl, the producer, said he really stole the headline, is what he did. And the Greek was furious. He was boiling over. He was already upset, thinking he was getting shorted on airtime by Brent throughout the season. And when everybody got together that night at a place called Pear Trees in New York, it was a bar and a restaurant the CBS crowd usually went to on the weekends. Brent and the Greek wound up at the same table. There were about 8 people there. And the Greek kept complaining, and everybody had too much to drink. And after one complaint led to another, Brent got up, walked over to the Greek and said, Greek, I can make you disappear anytime I want. And at that point, Greek just punched him right in the face. And the place was full of media people, not just CBS people. So it got out, made the Washington Post. A few days later, it was front page in the New York papers. And it was a cause celeb, and it was really big news at the time. These celebrities were fighting. And we opened the next show. I was actually the writer on that show in October 26, 1980. We opened that show with boxing gloves in front of each guy, Phyllis George dinging a bell, saying round 1. And that's how we started the show. It was the highest rated show of the year. And Van Gordon Sauter, who was then the president of CBS Sports, didn't suspend either guy, didn't fine either guy. His attitude was that if we could just get them to settle down and apologize to each other and work together, we're going to wind up having a really highly rated season on the NFL today, and that's exactly what happened.
Who was the first one to make peace among the two?
I'm not sure. I think the producer, really, Mike Pearl, made the piece. Then he just got them together and got them to agree. But they never really respected each other after that. On the surface, they always said that they got along. In fact, 8 years later, the Greek was on the David Letterman show, ostensibly to talk about politics, which he was still known as an expert. And Letterman had him on to talk about the '88 election, but then he asked him if he had any fights with Brent recently. And the Greek said, we've been together 13 years. Even your marriages have a fight now and then. We had one argument in 13 years, and you guys are still talking about it. He said, actually, we're the best of friends. Well, it turned out they weren't the best of friends.
And did you know, obviously what, Jimmy the Greek, it's a sad ending with him, but were you still in contact with him after he left the show? Scott and I were talking.
I was.
Obviously we all, anybody who's seen the 30 for 30 knows the story, but why wasn't he, obviously what happened when he said the statements he did killed his career, but as a person, what was that like seeing him later in those years?
It was sad. I knew Jimmy going back to Miami days. And he was king of the world in those days, even before the NFL today. He had a syndicated newspaper column in 300 newspapers that ran 3 times a week. He had a radio show that was syndicated around the country. There was this place on Arthur Godfrey Boulevard called The Forge, which was one of the great restaurant and bar places in all of Miami Beach. And he always had the best table there. He was kind of a god in the sports world in those days. And when I came to CBS, we knew each other, and he got there the year before me, and we started going to the track every Monday. We were both horse racing fans, and Greek always bought lunch, and I always drove, and we had a great time and hung out together, and always stayed friends. And even after he was fired by CBS for making those controversial comments on Martin Luther King weekend in 1988. The Greek after that was, he had lost his edge. He had lost his ability to earn a living when CBS stopped paying him. And he no longer had the column. He no longer had a public relations business. And he had to count on gambling to make a living. And he wasn't as sharp as he was in his 20s and 30s. And he was losing. And, he was trying to borrow money from all of his friends, including me. I just wasn't in a position. I had just gotten married, and I wasn't in a position to lend him money, unfortunately, or fortunately for my sake, because I probably would have never got it back. And I relayed a story that Bob Fishman, the director, told at the end of the book. The Greek had been separated from his wife and moved to a kind of a shabby hotel in Las Vegas, and met Fishman for dinner one night when Fishman was out there, and was dressed in a tattered jacket and greasy long hair. And he said it was very sad. And of course, Fishman got the check at the end of the dinner. And before he left, the Greek said, "Can you do me one favor?" And he said, "What's that?" He said, "Can you lend me $100?" Well, that was such a sad thing to hear. that he was in that kind of shape.
Yeah.
And within a year or two, he had passed away. And I was very sad to hear that, and I was extremely sad not to be able to make the funeral. I was in Europe at the time, but he was quite a character. One of the most interesting people I knew in my life, and I'll never forget.
And revolutionary too. I mean, just looking back at where we've come with the NFL Today and even the NBC show. I mean, it's amazing to see the progression to where we are now as football fans and with gambling and everything, and also too the role of inclusive-ness. And there's one other person who you talk about in the book, and actually I wanted to ask you more questions because I had a crush on her when I was in school, but that's Jane Kennedy.
Oh, Jane Kennedy! Wow. Jane
wow.
Jane was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and as sweet as can be. So nice. She was Miss Ohio when she was 20 years old. Was in the Miss USA contest. Jane Kennedy, for your CFL fans who are too young to remember, was a gorgeous African American young lady, absolutely gorgeous, and she was the first African American woman on a show like this. She replaced Phyllis George in 1978 when Phyllis left the show. She wound up leaving the show for 2 years. CBS didn't know if Phyllis was coming back. Phyllis had gone through a rough marriage with Robert Evans. It was a very short marriage, but it was not what she had expected. She went home to live with her family in Denton, Texas. And during that time, when she was coming back, she met the future governor of Kentucky, John Y. Brown. They wound up getting married. And when she was getting a little bored of campaigning for him, she asked if she could come back on the show. But for those 2 years, Jane Kennedy had replaced her. Jane didn't have any experience doing live TV, but she had done quite a few tape shows and series, and she was on the Dean Martin show, and she was fairly well known around Hollywood. And when she came to CBS Sports, she was one of 16 who auditioned for the role of replacing Phyllis George, and she won that audition hands down, according to Brent. And she became very famous in a short time on the show, got tremendous publicity, and her career seemed to be going in a great direction until one Sunday at halftime, they came back to the set, and instead of Brent going to Irv and saying, let's talk about the scores on these games, he said to Jane, why don't you take us around the league? And that meant read the scores. And Jane had never done that. She was a football fan, but she wasn't a type of fan that guys are growing up. She didn't know how to read the scores. She didn't know how to that the team winning should always be first, etc. And she gave a lot of the scores kind of upside down. And Brent just let her hang out to dry. And it was really embarrassing for her. It was the beginning of the end for her. And when the producer, Mike Pearl, asked Brent why he did that, Brent said, I was just having fun with it, according to Pearl. And Fishman said in his earpiece, that was a real son of a bitch move, Brent. But nothing else, he was never punished in any way for that. And it sadly, it was the beginning of a lot of the press starting to challenge her knowledge of the game and what is she doing on a show like this. Well, Phyllis didn't know football any better than Jane did. In fact, Jane grew up adoring the great Jim Brown on the Cleveland Browns and became friends with him later on when she got to Hollywood. And she was friends with Muhammad Ali as well.
Yeah.
But when Phyllis said she'd like to come back, instead of slowly or moving Phyllis in and moving Jane over to like CBS Sports Spectacular, which they could have done, they fired Jane really for no reason at all. And they wound up having to pay her a year's salary to get her to accept the job. She wound up going over to a show called Greatest Sports Legends and hosted that show for 6 years before she decided to go back to Los Angeles and start a family.
How's she doing now?
She's doing great. She's kind of rebooting her career a little bit. I think you'll be seeing some things from Jane.
Oh, God, I hope so.
She's still absolutely lovely. It's still beautiful. I'll let her know how you feel, Greg.
All right, thanks. I mean, it's a schoolboy crush, but that's the one thing. I mean, you talk about, for those of us who grew up on the NFL today, the whole team you were with, and it's funny because Brent Musburger is from Chicago. I kind of started watching football after he left Chicago, so I've only heard the stories about him at Channel 2 and things like that. But your book really brought back some great memories for me. And if you could tell everybody where they can find the book. I mean, I know you've been on a lot of shows. Have you been on Rich Eisen's show yet?
I have not.
They were talking about your book one day, and not that long ago. So I'm hopefully you're going to get it. Hopefully somebody will reach out and have you on the show, because I mean, I love hearing these stories.
Isn't Rich Eisen with NFL Network?
Yes.
Yeah, I was on the Good Morning Football show. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
I was on live in the morning, way back at the end of September.
Right.
With those three stalwarts.
Yeah.
Kay Adams was terrific.
Yeah, what I love about that show is they do bring back, they talk about the history, and so and I know when Rich talked about your book on his show, my ears perked up because I think we had just you and I had started exchanging emails, and I'm like, hey, so that was kind of cool for a guy like me and Scott. I mean, we like doing this history podcast because we do it for the love of the game. So, hey, where can everybody find your book?
Well, normally I would say Amazon, but Amazon has been out of books for a while. My publisher tells me that they should be getting books again starting this weekend. So if you want to order with Amazon, I'm pretty sure they'll have it. I know Barnes & Noble has books now, but we're into a third printing.
Oh, wow.
I have outsold Chris Christie's book, and he's been on every major network news show. And all I'm doing is podcasts.
Well, the great thing about football is it brings everybody together, no matter what side of the aisle you are on. And Scott and I have these conversations offline often, that the one thing we love talking, that's why we love doing this podcast, is because we get to meet great guys like you who, were there. And it's just amazing how football kind of brings us all together. Doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter nationality. If you love football, that's for Scott and I, that's all we can ask from anybody who comes on our show. So no, I really appreciate you coming on. And also, you're on social media. I know you follow us on Twitter. Let everybody know where to find you on Twitter.
Yeah, at Rich Podolsky, Podolsky, at Rich Podolsky on Twitter. And I wanted to tell your CFL fans, if they're looking for that article about Indian Jack Jacobs, they could Google Indian Jack Jacobs Sooner Magazine, SOONER. It's the University of Oklahoma's alumni magazine. It goes out to 50,000 alumni. And they were all too happy to hire me to write the story for them. And There's tremendous photos of him in that.
Oh, those photos are amazing. And, I was talking with Scott before we went on, and I didn't realize it until I was looking at things this morning. But, I know the LA Rams get credit for having the first logo on a helmet. The Sooners did. If what I'm seeing is correct, I don't know if any other college teams had logos on their helmets.
I'm not sure, but boy, when I saw those photos in Linda's house, of her father, it just gave me goosebumps and chills.
Yeah.
And Darrell Royal, the great coach of the University of Texas, called him the greatest college football player he had ever seen, Indian Jack Jacobs. And he, as a kid, hitchhiked over 100 miles to see Oklahoma play Santa Clara in that game. Just some heartwarming stories in there.
Yeah.
And I got to talk to a lot of his old teammates, including Bud Grant.
I was just gonna ask you, how's the coach doing? I mean, I don't know how long ago it was you talked to him, but
he sounded like he was still in his 50s. He'd sharp as attack, just great. And some of his old teammates had some great stories about Jack Jacobs was not only a great quarterback, he was a great commander. I would want to be in his foxhole anymore. Anyhow, nice talking to you guys.
You too, Rich.
You too, Rich.
Hey, Rich, we're going to let you go here, but hang on at the end after we hit the stop button. We just want to talk to you just for about a couple minutes before we let you go. Hey, for everybody who's listening, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll hope to see you soon. Now that we're rolling into Christmas, so happy belated Thanksgiving to everybody. And if we don't hear from, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from us before Christmas. But if not, definitely have a happy holiday. Rich, you too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rich. That was great. That was
thanks.
We're proud of the Blue Bomber name, so proud of its glory and fame. We're best in the West, and we'll take on the rest when we get to the East-West game. Fight, fight, let's fight through that line down the field. Our Blue Bomber teams never yield. Let's fight on to victory, for great is our destiny. So fight on, Blue Bombers, fight! We'll shout as you go charging by. We'll send up our cheers to the sky. Behind you we'll stand, you're the best in the land, and we'll shout out our praise on high. Fight, fight, let's fight down the field yard by yard. Let's fight down the field, hit 'em hard. For we want a touchdown team and we want a chance to scream, so fight on, Blue Bombers, fight!
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.